my name is Brianna Hansen, and this is my modeling project on action potential. Action potential begins in the membrane of the neuron. The membrane of the neuron contains channels that allow sodium ions and potassium ions to enter and exit the neuron at appropriate times. The membrane is semi-permeable, which means it allows some smaller particles to enter and exit freely like oxygen, but it does not allow large ions like sodium and potassium to enter and exit as they please. Sodium and potassium have to enter through channels that close and open when stimulated. To generate action potential in a neuron, the voltage ion sodium channels must open to allow the sodium to rush into the cell. Once the activation gates open that allow the sodium in the cell, it causes the voltage of the cell to raise from its resting -70 millivolts to its threshold potential, which is usually around -55 millivolts. This is a critical point because if the stimulant that caused the first sodium channel to open is not strong enough, then action potential cannot be generated. After the cell reaches the critical -55 millivolts, the voltage in the cell continues to raise to +30 millivolts. And the inside of the cell, which is also called the intracellular part of the neuron, has reached its potential. This process is known as depolarization. Once the +30 millivolts is met, the inactivation gates within the membrane cause the flow of sodium ions to stop. When this occurs, the channel is said to be completely inactivated. While the sodium channels are closing, the voltage-gated potassium channels are opening. Positively charged potassium ions rush out of the cell, and it shifts the voltage back towards the resting of -70 millivolts. This process is called repolarization. By the time the potassium channels reach the resting potential of the cell, more potassium has moved out than is actually necessary, and hyperpolarization occurs. The cell drops below the resting potential of -70 millivolts and stops at -80 millivolts. Once all of the potassium channels have closed, the neuron returns to its normal resting potential. Once all of the potassium channels have closed, the neuron returns to its normal resting potential and action potential has been generated. You may be wondering how in the world does the sodium get back into the extracellular part of the membrane and potassium get back into the intracellular part? Well, let me tell you about this really awesome thing called the sodium-potassium exchange pump. Over time, this pump returns the intracellular and extracellular ion concentrations back to normal. However, it is not vital in generating one action potential because the cell contains large amounts of sodium and potassium ions in their respective sides of the membrane. The sodium-potassium pump is vital though when the neuron is maximally stimulated. That means the neuron is generating action potential at approximately 1,000 per second. While this process of generating action potential is occurring in the membrane, typically it will not respond to additional stimuli until normal resting potential has been established. This is known as the refractory period of the membrane. It has two parts to it: the absolute refractory period and the relative refractory period. During the absolute refractory period, the membrane can't respond to further stimulation because all of the sodium channels are either open at threshold or they are inactivated. The relative refractory period begins when the sodium channels return back to their resting state. They are able to respond to an outside stimulus if it is larger than normal. Thanks for watching my video on action potential. The end.